Morning, everybody. Welcome to this meeting of the Central Otago District Council Hearings Panel. Firstly, my apologies for not being there in person, but I'm better off where I am with what I've got than being in that room with other people. So my apologies for that. There are no apologies for the meeting today. The first item on our agenda is on page 5, which is confirmation of the minutes, and there's minutes to be confirmed between pages 6 and 37. Someone like to move that they be confirmed, please?
Just Neil, page 15, it's the set of minutes there, which was an independent commissioner. Do we actually approve those? No. So I'd say that
with the exception, with the exception of the 8th of December commissioner meeting.
Then I will move.
Thank you. Thank you for reminding me that was I did notice that and I forgot all about it. So thank you. I'll second that. All in favour?
Aye.
Against, carried. Thank you. And the only other agenda item today is item number 24.8.2. Try to get to the right page in a moment, will be better. Is an application for a resource consent at 172 Burn Cottage Road. So a bit of formalities to go through. This is the properly convened meeting of the hearings panel called for the purpose of hearing submissions in relation to a resource application to undertake a subdivision at 172 Burn Cottage Road, Cromwell. I'd ask the Minute Secretary to report on proceedings to date.
All statutory requirements under Section 95 of the Resource Management Act have been complied with. The Section 42A report prepared by the planning consultant has been circulated to address for service and all submitters. The submissions received have been identified in the report.
Thank you, Karen. The following procedure will be followed for the hearing. The panel and officers may ask questions. Council's officers or its consultants shall put any questions through the chair, and the chair shall be deemed to be the person asking the question. The applicant or the applicant's representative shall make submissions and present evidence. There are no submitters today, but if they were there, they would make their submission and present evidence. The planning consultant shall then make their submission. The applicant then has the right to reply, but shall not be permitted to again traverse the evidence nor raise new evidence. So before proceeding with the hearing, I'd ask that all parties appearing identify themselves. Obviously, the panel's there with Councillor McPherson and Kearney, Karen to the right, Anne Rogers, our planning advisor, and Kirsten should be over on the far right. And I'm Neil Gillespie, and as I said, I'm sorry I'm doing this from home on Teams, but just best place to be. So from the applicant, we'll hear, please. Who we got?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name's Alan Cubitt. I'm a planning consultant based in Dunedin. I'm representing the applicant company, Burn Cottage Road Joint Venture. So on my right, I have Mr. Sam Hazeldine, or Dr. Sam Hazeldine, apologies. Sam is the applicant and owner, and he'll present a short statement once we get underway. On my left, I have landscape architect Mr. Mike Moore, who has pre-circulated evidence, and we'll speak to that in due course. And sitting behind us, we also have Julia Trudeau. I'm not sure if you can see these folks, Mr. Chair, but Julia is a part of the applicant company, joint venture, and she's not speaking today, just observing. We also have our surveyor, Damien McLean. He's not speaking either, but if the panel has any queries or questions around servicing, roading, etc., Damien's your man. We have no idea about that technical stuff, so he's available to answer any questions. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Cubitt. So before we proceed, I do need to disclose a potential conflict that I could have with this application in my capacity as the Chief Fire Officer for the Cromwell Volunteer Fire Brigade. I'm aware that Fire and Emergency New Zealand made some submissions. What I can say is that I have had, in my role as the Chief of the Volunteer Brigade that might respond to something, have had no place or say in any of those discussions or matters, and I'm totally oblivious to them, and in my view have no conflict, but I want to make sure that's clear with the applicant that they're okay with that position.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I discussed that with Ms. Rogers, and we're very comfortable with you being on the panel, and we don't see any conflict. The matter that things raised has been addressed, and it's really just a technical engineering issue around the roading, and we've agreed to design the road to meet these standards, and if we're successful in this, I assume that will be a part of the consent condition. So we don't see any conflict, sir.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that very much. It was my view, but it's all very well for me to assume these things, and yeah. So thank you for that. Right. So on that basis, I'll move that. No, but I haven't done that yet. I'll move that the report of the planning consultant be taken as read. Someone like to second that? Ian.
Yes.
Thank you. All in favour?
Aye.
Aye. Against, carried. Thank you very much. Mr. Cubitt, we'll hand over you to present the case for the applicant.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Probably just start with a question actually, and have you folks actually visited the site yet, or when are you planning to undertake a site visit?
The panel hasn't been to a site visit in its capacity as the panel. I happen to live very, very close, so I'm pretty familiar with the site. I just live up Logan Valley Road, so I know the area pretty well. So I don't feel I need one. And I think if we do need one, we can consider that later on today. But at this stage, haven't done that.
Okay, thank you, sir. It's just I won't go into detail about the site. You've read about it. For your information, though, there are poles have been sited on the actual building platforms. When you do go up there, if you do go and have a look, they set out the building platform. So by no means are they the size of the buildings proposed here. It's just the building platform. You will see on the plan circulated, there's also a domestic curtilage area associated with that platform. They're not marked as far as I'm aware, so it's just the building platform. And if you do go up there, I went just to reacquaint myself yesterday, and this probably illustrates a bit of the frustration we had having to deal with the wholly productive land issue. Is the applicant is doing a little bit of work on the road there, and there's some gravel in the middle of it, so I just sort of veered to the left to try and get up the hill and got bogged. So if you do go there, don't follow the tyre tracks, go to the right, because it's very damp in that lower part. And when you do get up there, you'll see what we mean about, you will see the evidence about the constraints that we sort of highlight in that lower part of that, the property. And that's illustrated on both the scheme plan and the actual title plan, which is quite a lot of irrigation infrastructure and the like in that part of the area. But I'm not going to speak anymore now. I've got plenty of evidence that you would have read, and I'll speak to later. But I'm just going to introduce Stan now, and he's going to read his statement, which was provided over the weekend, I think. And I think Karen's probably passed on to you guys. You may not have had a chance to read it, but I think it's good for Sam to read this out, just to illustrate the vision for the property, because what they are proposing here is not a speculative rural residential subdivision, but it is actual rural use. It's an equestrian development, I guess you could call it that, for family and friends. Now, what we hadn't circulated with the evidence was a site plan that Sam had done some time ago that sort of set out what his equestrian sort of operation may look like up there. On that plan, there's two areas that we've marked managers' dwellings, and Sam will talk about that in his statement. That was the initial thinking, and there's two locations here, and I'm looking at the other councillors, panel members, they have a copy of that, so Sam can speak to that when we come through the video. So I'll pass over to Sam.
Thank you, Mr. Cubitt.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, councillors. Thank you, everyone here. Thank you, Kirsten, for all the time that's gone into this. I know there's a lot of people put a lot of time in. So we appreciate it. My name is Sam Hazeling. I currently live in Queenstown. I'm the county of Meadowcreek. I employ about 250 staff over in Queenstown. In addition to that, I am deeply invested in Question. It's a passion that's inspired by my daughters, Zara and Flossie, and that's a big part of what we're doing here. I am also interested and engaged and committed to preserving this incredible region that we live in for future generations, including my daughters, who have expressed a desire to live here into adulthood. As my daughters advance in their equestrian activities, their needs and those of the ponies are growing. As such, I want to create this rural development to encompass my family's growing needs. So our intention with 172 Burn Cottage Road is to turn the 32 hectares, most of which is currently too dry to be useful agriculturally or too wet at the bottom, into a rural development where we can live, where we can graze and breed horses. In addition, the local equestrian community will have opportunities to use the land for grazing their horses and also riding on facilities. We already have 3 local horses grazing the property to demonstrate this commitment, and we have local riders who utilise the land to exercise their horses. The ownership is currently in a joint venture, which is a vehicle to enable us to achieve our aim. The joint venture is holding it while we go through this resource consent process, so that if and hopefully when consent is granted, ownership can sit in the right entities, and I'll talk to that. Lot 1 is the largest, and that's the one that I'll own to build a house on and use it as rural development with an equestrian focus. So that's the one that will hold in my house and the equestrian facilities. Lot 2 is adjacent to my one. It's my partner Julia. We're long-term partners, but we live in different houses. So we're building houses next to each other. It's not the usual way to do relationships, so it works for us. Lot 2 consists of the hillside, which is the sparsest of the land. If you've been around there, you'll see that nothing really grows on there, but we intend to conserve the natural landscape there, which, the rocks and that sort of area, to keep it looking like it does. The bottom lot will be held by a company owned by my trust, the trust that owns the top. This enables us to own a house that we'll use as a manager's cottage, or manager's accommodation, and to be able to accommodate visitors when necessary for people grazing horses or using the equestrian facilities. We'll also use the surrounding paddock space where we can for equestrian, for the grazing and the horses that we're breeding. Now, the original proposal that we had still to have a manager's cottage up on the top lot, but we have removed this due to concerns from the council's landscape architect. If you look at the plan for the top, which is essentially how we want to have the equestrian facilities, the big central area, those are just fences, so that's essentially grazing. We need to have an arena, which I'll talk to the quality of the arena, which is useful for the local people, riders. But I was initially had a couple of ideas of where to put the manager's cottage, but through the consultation process, we realised that was something that people have different opinions on. Now we intend for the residents to be solar powered. It seems it's good for the environment, good for everything we're doing. So our mission is to develop a rural equestrian focused community that preserves and enhances the natural environment, strongly emphasising minimising our carbon footprint. As I said, this will include solar power for the accommodation and protected areas such as Lot 2. As the Cromwell region expands, our rural development offers a strategic opportunity to utilise the land near town in an aesthetically pleasing, environmentally conscious and productive way. Our long-term vision is that this property could become a useful equestrian facility that will make available to the local home classes. The opportunity is to provide a top quality arena service. This is something that isn't currently available in Cromwell. The service is important because it allows local young riders to train properly, and in the future we can possibly host events and attract riders from outside the region. There's a note just to say that given the uncertainty around what this may look like in the future, we haven't considered implications of hosting events there, and we'll address that if it becomes a reality in the future. But for now, it's essentially a training facility for me and my daughters and for the local pony clubs. Ultimately, my partner Julia and I aspire to make this land our permanent home, where we will aim to breed and raise top quality horses. The design philosophy. Initially, we proposed 4 sections to council, which was responding to the local equestrian community's need for affordable lifestyle-sized grazing sections in Cromwell, particularly those with shared equestrian facilities. However, after consultation and useful feedback from council, And we spoke with the neighbours. We've decided to scale back the plan to just have 3 lots and 3 building platforms. This decision aligns with our commitment to really preserve and enhance the natural landscape. It's the key reason we acquired the property. It's something we're really committed to contributing to. Our design philosophy for these 3 lots revolves around 3 core pillars, which are preservation, community, and family. And we will ensure that each element is deeply integrated into what we do here. Preservation is the first part. Our commitment is to preserving the natural environment. It's the environment we love. It's the environment we all moved to this area for. And it's reflected in, I think, where we've placed the building platforms so they're not visible. And also the adoption of solar powered residents. Also conservation efforts around lot 2, that hillside there. And the environmentally considerate use of horses. Why solar? I think we all know that solar energy is a great thing for reducing fossil fuels. And the impact of a single solar powered household is comparable to planting 100 trees. So this aligns with that preservation of both the local and the wider environmental goals. Why question, and how does that contribute to preservation? Well, as we know, some types of farming can damage the natural environment. However, breeding and grazing horses is a compelling environmental alternative to traditional farming of cattle or sheep and intensive agricultural ventures. The property is not well suited to traditional farming operations. Horses, by their very nature, tend to be very gentler on the land. Unlike cattle, which often pull the grass by the roots, horses nibble the tops of the grass blades, promoting regrowth and minimising soil disruption, which is important up there. This behaviour helps maintain healthy pastures and reduces the risk of soil erosion, which is a common environmental issue for cattle due to their heavier weight and more aggressive grazing habits. Horses produce less methane and it's good for the environment too. Regarding the land use, horse pasture can also be more harmoniously integrated with natural landscapes. They require fewer inputs like fertilisers and pesticides, which are often heavily used in agriculture. And they can be good, obviously, in agriculture to produce crops, but not so good for the local flora and fauna. We've already actually replanted the top paddocks in ryegrass, which is more aesthetically pleasing than what was there before, which is lucerne. Horses can coexist with various wildlife species, contributing to a balanced ecosystem, whereas, as we know, farming can often lead to monocultures. This holistic approach supports ecological resilience, promoting a healthier local environment and climate. When breeding and training horses, it's important to live on site. They are higher maintenance than everything else that you can farm. If anyone here knows horses, they are brilliant at finding ways to injure themselves. And so they really do require 24/7 care and attention. That's why I intend to live here, and that's why I want to have a horse manager living there as well. So I want to have the cottage at the top, but we'll put that down the bottom as long as this goes ahead. Because you need someone there, because I'm not always around. Community is second pillar. The local equestrian community has been really good to us. We went equestrian as a family, and so they've really supported us as we've learned the craft. And through this, what we're doing up here, we see an opportunity to give something back. As I said, currently there are limited opportunities for equestrian riders outside the areas. For local riders to train on a good surface, the arena surface is really critical, and there's nothing that would attract outside riders to come here and train. We aim to offer grazing to local pony club people and also use of facilities for them to train and to attract potentially equestrian visitors to come and enjoy Central Otago for longer periods. So you can bring your horses and you've got some value. For most equestrian families, having equestrian facilities is outside their financial reach. And therefore, that's why with our equestrian facility, the other part of it is, you often don't use equestrian facilities that frequently. And so they're not great uses of land. So that's why we want to, for an arena, for example, we want to potentially offer it to local pony clubs so they have a really great opportunity for training, but also, utilising those fields we have for grazing. And the third pillar that we're focusing on with this is family. This project isn't a typical development aimed at subdivision and sale. I'm not a property developer. I envisage this as a, creating a rural forever home, with an equestrian focus, a legacy that I plan to pass down to my daughters and, future generations beyond that. And similarly, Julia, my partner, intends to make Lot 2 a permanent home. She wants to preserve the future. It was actually Julia who fell in love with this area and found the property. In summary, our vision for 172 Burn Cottage Road, which is a 32-hectare property primarily unsuitable for traditional agriculture due to its arid conditions, is to develop a sustainable, equestrian-focused rural community. Here we plan to live, to breed and graze horses while providing valuable grazing land and riding facilities for the local equestrian community. 3 horses are already grazing there. We already have the local equestrian community utilising the land and just the beautiful landscape up there for training and for fitness work for their horses. The ownership is structured through a joint venture, which is just holding the property during this resource consent process. Upon approval, ownership will transition to align with our goals, being Lot 1 for myself and for the broader equestrian use, Lot 2 for Julia, and focusing on conservation of that unique hillside, and Lot 3, to provide essentially manager cottage accommodation and space for the equestrian facilities, activities. We intend for each lot to be solar powered to minimise environmental impact, and this commitment extends to maintaining the natural environment, especially in Lot 2, which is designated for preservation, making sure that beautiful hillside stays as it is. We're dedicated to reducing our carbon footprint, to harnessing solar power, to create a sustainable living model that reflects our environmental responsibility. We aim to enrich the local Christian community by offering top-tier facilities, a brilliant service for the kids to train on. This high-quality arena service will enhance their training and attract potentially regional Christian events in the future, which addresses Cromwell's current lack of such facilities. So, thanks again for hearing us. We appreciate your time. This is something that really means a lot to Julia and myself, and we want to create something pretty special there. So, thank you. I'll certainly take any questions. Mr. Chair, you're on mute.
He's got to unmute himself.
I'm not on mute anymore. I only did it to see if anybody was listening. Thank you, Mr. Hazelden. Very much appreciate your summary. In fact, I'd like to tell a whole lot of people that come to hearings to do what you just did, because it was very, very helpful. Thank you. I'd love to ask you a question. I often say this to people, but when you don't have one, you're best to shut up. But I will note that solar generation today in the Lowburn Valley is not very flash.
Is it not? And what was that?
No, well, I've just make the reference that I've got solar where I live, and there's not much generation happening today.
Oh, today, right, yeah. We'd hope that because we're above this inversion layer, we actually get more sun up there, so it might be more successful.
Yeah, good luck with that. Just want to clarify the building platforms. Just make sure I don't get myself confused with you said a manager's building platform was going to be on one of the top lots, and now it's going to be down below.
So initially, when we went through this process, see that little diagram I've made, which says here is how I want to set up that field for a question. So when we initially applied for resource consent, we had a manager's cottage in that northeast corner of the field.
Yeah.
And through the process, we also had a lot over on the west plateau field, but through and actually not the neighbours were fine, but through consultation with Kirsten and with Jess, who did a landscape review, we decided to remove that manager's cottage from up the top and repurpose and utilise the bottom lot that is currently being requested, and we'll utilise that as manager's accommodation.
That's Lot 4, Mr Chair, on the.
Lot 4, yeah, it used to be lot, yeah, it's lot 4 because lot 3 was removed.
Right, just let me try and get my bearings. I'm just working off my computer copies. It's not as easy as paper, and my printer won't work. So
Yeah.
4, 3, 2. So lot 3 has been removed. Is that correct?
Oh, actually, it's lot, if you look at the numbers, it's lot 3 was removed, yeah, and that was up on that top left.
Yeah.
So that west plateau.
Yep.
Got
it.
we had the landscape review, and so we decided to remove the manager's cottage from the northeast corner. And move a house from that west plateau, and instead we're just going to utilise the bottom lot for managed accommodations.
Yep, no, got that now. Thank you. That's clarified that for me. I've now found the right plan to look at, and I now can make sense. Thank you. I have no other questions. Panel, Martin,
None.
Ian.
In terms of upkeep of the driveway, how would that be allocated between the 3 property owners?
Well, we're gonna own all 3. So, I mean, I would see lots 1 and 2 would, because the majority of it is access for lots 1 and 2. So, they'd be responsible for upkeep of the driveway.
There will be a right of way, but currently the driveway is within Sam's lot, which is lot 2, but there will be a right of way earliest lot. So it'll be the normal right of way rules and regulations of the Local Government Act. He was with that. But I'd say Sam will be paying for it because he'll done a week on it, won't he?
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, does that answer the question? It's the right of way.
Yeah.
For the other 2 lots. So yeah, I mean, I guess you got to, yeah, exactly.
And
Happy with that, Ian?
Yeah, well, it was mentioned that part of it was 19 degrees in the engineer's report. And which part?
No,
Grading?
it's been, I think it's, well, don't even see that, but I think that it's been down the height of Steve's, it's probably about 16 now. So,
Yeah, because within the recommendations.
and themes are quite happy with that. We also, while we're talking about that, themes were a little bit concerned about the sharp right angle up there on the top, and the plans haven't been amended to address that. It's possibly wide enough, so that, to get the fire engine around there, that will be amended so they can burn easier. That's good, so we've accepted all their concerns and we'll address that through the consent conditions that we've successful.
And just out of interest more than anything, how many horses can you graze per hectare?
Well, it depends if you're supplementing feed or not, but generally you would have 2 acres per horse. So, but you can go, if you go more, if you have more intensive, you use that supplement with more hay and more hard feed. But the way I look at it at the moment, initially, certainly the first phase is we use that top right field for grazing. And then we actually use that top east field. And in the west plateau, initially we're not planning on doing anything there, so we'll just use that for hay.
Actually, currently there is hay bales sitting on it.
Yeah, I've made it to hay, and I actually shipped the whole lot out to the farmers locally, so. Yeah.
Thank you.
Other questions about it? Or?
Neil to speak.
I think that's near.
It's lost them.
Yeah, so
He might
you
have,
got a big tap.
he takes below something. See.
It's off to the side.
Yeah, might just turn his camera on.
Neil, can you hear us? Oh, no, he's just very much. Yes. Technology.
Yes, modern technology.
Well, the image where you're going to
Okay. Okay. We just, we like to adjourn just until his laptop started to close.
Are you there now?
I am,
Yep.
yeah. I can
Right.
hear everybody. I'm very, very sorry about that. I don't know what my laptop decided to do. Teams just shut down, and then the rest of it decided to shut down as well. And I thought it should do an update while it was restarting.
happens to the best of us, unfortunately.
Yeah,
I
well,
was gonna say, one thing I'd add to Councillor Clooney's question about the right of way, actually. And that's why we're currently, we can't even get trucks up to pick up the hay on the top at the moment. So that's why there's currently some gravel going in on the bottom section of the road. So yeah, the road obviously needs, and the design has been well integrated so we can get horse trucks out and trucks and chains, so.
On lot forward, is the wheat area that you were mentioning is that to the, to the east of that lot?
Let me see. No. It's actually just in here. This is all wetland sort of in here. There's a stream that comes down there. And then what's happened at the moment is it's the little driveway there has also got all wet and it's sort of grass and wet, so you can't get trucks up. So that's why I'm putting gravel up there at the moment. Just to be able to get trucks up to get the hay off the top.
So all of this area.
It's sort of that area there is quite wet because you get the water coming in. Yeah.
can someone give me a hint as to which area that is, please, just so I know?
Oh, just saying, just to the, I mean, as you go up the left of the driveway where currently there's a pond, it's sort of quite wet up above that at the moment, and the driveway is wet at the moment too.
So, Mr. Chair, if you look at the, you'll have a series of coloured plans attached to the scheme plans, I think. And one of them is like a sort of a constraints plan. And on it, it'll show where A2 on that is where the current drive comes in. To the left of that is the pond, it shows the pond. And then above it is an area that's marked as A4. And that's currently very wet. Now, I was up there yesterday and the drive's fine to get up now. Just the only reason I had a problem is because the bigger dump, the big load of gravel right in the middle of the drive, and I went left when I should have gone right. But it is very wet in that area. Hence, it's not particularly used for agricultural.
Yeah, no, it's all right. I'm happy with that. I don't need to know exactly where it is. I've got a rough idea, so that's good enough for me. Thank you. Ian, does that resolve your questions about right of ways?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. No other questions?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. We'll now hear from Mr. Moore. Now, given the comment you made earlier, he did prepare us a little summary. So would you like him to read that or to speak to his evidence?
I think we've got his evidence and had a look at that. So if he's got a summary, that would be a good way to start. Most important thing I always find in these is tell us what it is that we have to know, must know, and we can then go from there.
Thank you. First, just your attention to the graphic supplement that I provided immediately. And I'll just take you through that quickly. So we go to figure 1. You know where it's started. That's the location plan there and the photo points plan. Figures 2 to 12 illustrate the character of the site and area. And I'll just read through my statement and those for this to go. So the wider landscape context is the Upper Truther Valley, defined by the Peter Range to the northwest and by the Dunstan Range to the southeast. Lake Dunstan lies closest to the eastern side of the valley, and a series of glacial outwash terraces lie between the lake and the base of the ranges to each side. The site is located on the terrace top and terrace base on the western side of the lake. The general land use landscape pattern in the area is one of extensive pastoralism on slopes of the frozen ranges. and more intensive agricultural, horticultural, and viticultural use and settlement in the valley flats, terraces, and lower slope areas. These lower elevation areas are increasingly becoming greener, more diverse, and less open in character as land use intensification occurs. They are now significantly domesticated by the presence of residential and farm buildings, shelter and amenity plantings, irrigated pasture, exotic woodlots, orchards, and vineyards. As shown in figure 13, which is here. There are the terrace on which the site was located, identified as a significant amenity landscape in the simple plan. These two outwash terraces are distinctive features of the Upper Creek Valley anyway, and some but not all have been identified in the plan for their landscape values, either as outstanding natural features, outstanding natural landscapes, or significant amenity landscapes. As shown here. And figure 13 shows the location of the landscape overlays. You can see the site marked in red there with the significant amenity landscape marked in green around it. Significant amenity landscapes are second tier landscapes in the district plan with their basis in section 7C of the RMA, which is to have regard to the maintenance and enhancement of amenity values. Schedule 19.6.2 in the plan provides brief rationale for the identification of ONFs and ONLs, but there's no rationale or values description given for SALs. I've assessed the primary rationale for the significant amenity landscape, which hosts the subject site, as its contribution to the visual backdrop of Cromwell and Lake Dunstan. Unlike the low-green terrace to the north, which is identified for both the ONF on the terrace face and SAL on terrace top. The subject terrace is not recognised as a landscape, as a landform of national importance in the New Zealand geopreservation inventory. And amenity landscape suggests primarily visual values relating to pleasantness and aesthetic coherence. The Cromwell landscape is a character that to a large degree aligns with the quintessential Central Otago landscape values. Fundamental to this is the presence of the Pisa and Dunstan ranges, which contain the Upper Cooper Valley within a dominant natural context and provide impressive and memorable backdrops. The gradation with increasing elevation from more to less modified contributes to landscape coherence. The glacial outwash terraces are natural features that contribute strongly to the landscape character. Their landscape values are highest where their form is highly legible under open grassland and where there are no patterns of vegetation land use that are at odds with the landforms. Given that the terraces are mainly viewed from more settled lower elevation viewpoints in the areas surrounding, the terrace faces and terrace top edges are the most visually sensitive areas. The terraces are at a relatively low elevation in the Upper Cooper Valley landscape, and their flat tops make them suitable for agricultural, horticultural, and viticultural development. In many areas now, they have been subject to significant modification and domestication, and I consider that they relate more to the developed and settled lowland area, including lakes, areas, than the more natural ranges. In places, even terrace spaces have been modified to the detriment of their legibility and natural landscape character by forestry and viticulture. In figures 10 to 12 and 14 and 15 illustrate this point. In my assessment, the site has varying degrees of sensitivity to landscape change and recommend mitigation conditions reflect this. Mitigation measures include controls over the building's scale, height and colours, controls to protect rural character, minimise the impacts of earthworks, and to avoid adverse effects of exotic plantings. On lot 2, landform screening is proposed to minimise the visual prominence of built form while blending appropriately with natural landforms. Figure 17 illustrates the landscape mitigation concept for the lot 2 building platform. I consider that the lower part of the site, lot 4, is low sensitivity due to its location in an already relatively domesticated valley. My assessment of visually prominent and memorable terrace faces and top edges have high sensitivity to development, but I consider that sensitivity reduces with distance from the edge of the terrace top. Terraces form part of the relatively modified local landscape and a level of land use intensification and domestication on the flat terrace blocks with an unexpected, considering the existing character of the wider landscape context, nor restricted by the land provisions. It's my assessment that, firstly, development on the floor platform located within the valley area and in the context of other existing rural housing will integrate readily. Secondly, development on lot 2 is located on terrace type. It has generally low visibility from surrounding areas due to landform screening. The proposed mitigation efficiency will ensure it integrates well with low impacts on naturalness, legibility and coherence of the rural landscape. The lot 2 platform is a sensitive site and terrace type edge. The proposed landform screening, coupled with the other mitigation controls, will effectively mitigate the visual effects of development on the site from surrounding areas. The earthworks proposed will result in some adverse effects on the naturalness of the landform. This will not result in more than minor adverse visual effects from significant viewpoints beyond the property. There will be some landform modification associated with the proposed access drive relocation and upgrading, but this largely follows the natural contours. Being located within the gully landform, driveway earthworks will have low visibility from beyond the site. Overall, it's my assessment the landscape effects of the proposed development will be adverse in nature, low to moderate and minor in degree at most. So that's all I had to, that's all my statement covers, and I'm happy to take any questions if you have them.
Thank you, Mr. Thank you, Mr. Moore. I'm interested to have a look at the screening proposed, or sorry, the mounting for lot 2, which I think is towards the end of the figures you've attached. And in particular on your evidence, it's page 40, I think it is. Could you just take me through the cross section that you've drawn there, just so I know which way I'm looking at that? I'm assuming that it's coming from the northwest to the southeast. Is that correct, that cross section?
Now, are you looking at figure 17?
Figure 17, yes.
So that's looking left is east, right is west.
Yep. Oh, yeah. So it's coming from, so that cross section is coming from northwest to southeast. Is that correct?
So we're looking south.
Oh, hang on. Sorry, beg your pardon. I need to turn it around because I'm looking at it. It's a landscape thing and I'm looking at a portrait. Sorry. Let me just do that.
So the arrows in the plan there on the top little plan show the direction that the viewers on you're looking south, west.
Yeah, sorry, just bear with me. I'm just trying to orientate because it's landscape. Hang on a minute. I just need to make a change. Where the hell do that? So the cross section that you're showing is actually running from southwest to northeast.
Yeah, so on the left, we are southeast.
Yep.
And on the right, we are northwest.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. That's right. That makes sense. So that's just showing that. So the cross section down below the lot 2 mounding section, that's just showing that the landscaping mound, and you've got that too. Is that a height of 379? You're saying?
Yes. So we're digging down into the building platform.
Yep.
We are mounting to the eastern or the southeastern side of the site. But we're doing it in such a way that it won't look like a bund. It will blend with the hill forms.
Okay. So effectively, you're making a depression, and you're going to take advantage of having made a depression. Is that an easy way of putting it?
That's true, and there'll be more fill coming in than cut because this material coming from the roadway as well.
Okay. And then, sorry, go on.
Sorry, the other thing to note, Mr. Chair, is if you do get up there and have a look where those poles are, that building platform on lot 2 is actually in a natural depression.
Yep.
Kind of hard to tell from that, but there is a natural depression, and that's why it's been sat there and sat towards the edge, it's just a better location.
In fact, figure 2 and 3 kind of show that impression a little bit. Hard to see, a little hard to see, but.
Yeah.
While I'm talking about 2, I might just have to just make a wee correction. I should have made, sorry. The figure 2, captions not right. It should say view towards lots 1 and 2 building platform from lot 1. There's an error there, I'm sorry. I'm just noting that correction.
Did you say it's on figure 2, did you say?
Yes. The viewpoint is from lot within lot 1, looking towards the building platforms on lot 1. So it was that incorrectly captioned.
Yeah. Thank you. And while we're talking about lot 1, I think I read at one of those pages at the figures at the end, you said, hang on, I just want to check. It was one of the views from on what number? Here we are. Yeah, figure 12. So that's the view, and figure 11 as well. So one's the view from the Bruce Jackson Lookout on State Highway 8, and the other one's from State Highway 8 at Northburn. And you've noted there that lot 1 is mainly screened. Just want to clarify, screened by what? Natural or?
Lot 1 is screened by natural land for the moment.
Yeah.
From that Northburn platform, not entirely, but mainly.
Yeah. Okay. So there's nothing being it's screened because of the natural landform, not for any other reason. And from Northburn, it's only partly screened because you can just the angle of the view.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Cool. Yeah. Thank you. No, I just wanted to make sure I hadn't missed something, that you were going to do something physical there or not. Okay. I don't have any particular other questions, I think, to clarify anything. I understand what you've told us. Councillor Cooney.
If the road reserve area in lot 4 is discounted, what's the available area of LUC3 land that's available for agricultural production? Like if you take out the road reserve area, how much LUC3 land is there in lot 4?
In lot 4, very little. According to the LLC land use plans, probably a third of that is technically class 3, but I doubt whether it is.
So about 1 hectare.
Yeah, if that, that's what it's actually worth going have a look. It's not, it's swamp. Do you have that plan there? That should be attached to the scheme plans, the engineering plans. They kind of tells you what the land is like. Technically, there is LUP3 land in there purely because of the nature of those land care research plans, which are very broad scale. But I would doubt that there is actual any LUC3 land affected by this. Recognising though that value there is some good fertile all down, but I would doubt that this is.
Is it what mentioned the agronomist's report there?
Yeah, well, he's
He's there.
he's a
You happy with that, Ian? I guess just an observation about LUC3 as inaccurate as probably the current inventory is. It is the inventory until it's done by a process other than what anybody else can do in the meantime, or it meets the exceptions. So obviously, as part of any decision making, we have to take that into account. I'm sure you appreciate and understand that.
Yes, that's correct. And I think both Kirsten and LRC have accepted that. It probably meets those exceptions. Unfortunately, this particular application highlights a number of issues with the current planning regime, that being one of them, that NPS that came out of Wellington, which is really probably one of the more impractical NPSs I've ever seen. Not particularly relevant to Central Otago, but if you take your neighbour down the road, Central District, probably all the flat land in Cooper District would be LU 1 to 3. So then you have that NPS, it's like, well, what do we do here? We're not allowed to do anything. Probably a slight exaggeration because they're not a tier 1 or tier 2, but it's a very blunt instrument, not helpfully written. But I think there's enough here for you to set that it gets through that 310 exception, or even if it doesn't, it's just so insignificant. And what is actually happening on that land, this means it's not really productive farming, purely simply. And what's proposed here is a better rural use for the site than what has happened in the past.
Yes, nice.
Most of it, this swampy area.
Yeah, it's swampy, it's got irrigation infrastructure all through it. 'Cause the other thing to look at is the scheme plan. And we'll note that area's got a lot of easements over it. Now, I haven't gone into detail as how that would impact on you actually using that land. Probably in the bundle that you have, it is attached to my evidence. I can't remember which appendix it is, but if you look at this area here is what I just showed you on the coloured plan. There's just, that's basically all easements. So I'm got to the bottom of that, but I think that's where all that water company in that area, sort of everything sort of comes into that area. And there's here electricity, pump stations, and you've got a pond and all sorts of things in there. So you couldn't actually plant trees or anything like that. Even if it was dry, you couldn't actually plant trees or vineyards there because you wouldn't be able to with all those easements on them. Well, not a lot of it anyway.
Where does that water come from?
It comes from that little gully, which is up to the northwest of the driveways you're going up. It's sort of drains down through there.
What about the irrigation? What's that company?
Oh, that one is, well, that's coming from that stream, which you'll see, to the north, it's coming into the northwest of the pond. Figure A of Mike's report. So
Sorry, what figure are we looking at in Mike's report, sorry?
Mike's report, just, there's a stream that runs into the pond. And there is, there's irrigation that comes to the neighbours. So the two neighbours have rights to irrigate from that pond, and it's right. But that swampy area is that gully up to the north, east, northwest.
Yeah, so you've got two things happening there. You've got a natural stream that's created basically a swamp, but then which probably feeds into that pond. But then you've got various easements servicing the irrigation, which Mr. Chair probably knows more about than us actually up in that area. And the easements are to convey water, to store water, to convey water and electricity, to take water, to pump water, to convey electricity and to maintain an electricity transformer. So all that's happening in that lower corner.
Yeah. What figure on Mike's evidence did you say we were referring to? Sorry, just make sure I got it right. Figure.
Oh, I was talking about figure A, but that's not what, that's not what we're talking about the easement, that was just the water. That was a visual.
Mr. Chairman, just if it's helpful, page 498 of the agenda has got a helpful outline of what's going on in that bottom area, which is my southern land, shows where all of those various infrastructure items are, pregnancy, etc.
Thank you.
In
Yep.
planning, it's a bit of a shambles. That's a typical routine.
So looking for a moment at figure 5 in Mr. Moore's evidence that shows from Burn Cottage Road, and then it points to lot 4. I'm picking that we shed in that power pole or a pump shed.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. And that's for your property or for someone else's?
There's 3 properties that have rights to that one. There's mine, and then there's the property to the east and then the property to the west.
Okay, and that's a bore, a boring.
Well, there's two things actually, the pump shed, there's irrigation from the pond for 3
Yeah.
properties, and then there's also, yes, that's correct.
Okay, yep, cool. No, it's all right. Makes sense. I can picture it now. Thank you. Right, Ian, are you happy with where you got to?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, Martin.
Mr. Orr, in the peer review done by Vivian and Espy, they don't necessarily agree with you, which happens. We always get 2 experts, you get 3 different opinions, but the mitigation proposals, their argument is that that tends to be more damaging than the setting. I'd just like you to comment on Vivian Espy's conclusions.
Mitigation.
Yes.
Yeah, well, I agree that it can be, sometimes mitigation can be, it can add to the problem rather than help. But in this case, I'm comfortable that, we are going to, the way we've planned it, that it will very much, be effective. Particularly with lot 2, for example, looking at that from any viewpoint really around about the Cromwell side, it's going to just look like the hill continuing the same land cover on it. There'll be no visibility really at all of the building behind it. And the things like building height and colour and the fact that there's some controls over what you can plant, which are all there to make sure that they don't become an effect in themselves. Likewise, lot 1, that's all about minimising the impact of built form, making sure that the house is visible, say, from the Northburn area. It's going to be very hard to see because it's going to blend very much with the colours of the landscape. It's not going to be sticking up high above the skyline. It's not going to be dark and large conifers, for example, we could put in to hide it. But that can't happen because of the controls of it. So it's all about integrating it on, and I'm comfortable personally that it'll be effective.
Thank you.
And you also have quite significant viewing distance to this, it's not in place.
Again, Neil?
Sorry, I couldn't hear that last part. Sorry.
I just made the comment here that the viewing distances here are also quite significant. So it's not in your face. Yeah, the mitigation proposed. But I was up there yesterday, and when you're up on that top ridge and you look west, there's actually probably about, I didn't count them, but 3 or 4 houses, probably at the higher altitude to this, that are back in, they probably won't be in the ONL, but they're probably just below it, I would say. And if I look at Mike's figure 11, they're probably in there somewhere, but you can't pick them out, even though they're quite prominent when you're in this environment. And that's what the envisage will happen here, you won't pick it out.
Well, what I was going to say is that I don't think that seeing a house or 2 on this terrace top is inappropriate. It's not one of the main things I'm saying. It's part of the lowland landscape of up through the valley. In some development is expected and will look fine. But I think what we want to do is make sure it's not very, very prominent and inappropriately sited, and that's what they can do.
Mr. Moore, would it not be probably the only building on top of the terrace that will be able to be seen in some way, shape, or form in the whole valley?
Do you want to repeat that?
So I think what you just said is it wouldn't be inappropriate to be able to see that on that terrace, but wouldn't it be the only building or residential site that's on the top of the terrace in the vicinity?
No, there's already one house on the property next door. To be
Northwest.
There's already a house being built. On the top, if you look at figure 16 on the top, and you orientate the north top right corner. There's a building going in there now. There's already a number of farm sheds in the area. And there's on the terraces around, more generally, there's lots of buildings on this in this exact sort of type of landscape, terrace type.
So what figure are you referring to? There's already a building going up on, sorry, I thought you said 16, did you?
16, doesn't actually show, because it's an old photograph, but where it says lot 3, TB 520, 521.
Mr. Chair, figure 1's probably the best plan to look at for that. So site in red, and in the northwest corner, you'll see an area that's got planting and cracks and stuff. There is a house constructed in there.
Does it show up in any of those views from Northburn or Bruce Jackson's lookout at all?
No, you can't see it. You know, figure 12, isn't it?
Yeah, figure 12. Yeah, figure 11 or figure 12. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it was just a thing of the angle. Likewise, what we're talking about would be very, very hard to see from the closing points.
I suppose that does lead to the question for the building platform on lot 2. Is there any other sites for that considered?
Well, there were a number of sites considered, but this lot 2 site was one that was particularly sought by the applicant, it's fair to say. So we've looked around that. With that.
But that was not the first site looked at. The other ones were more prominent. So it's been pushed back into that precedent and probably as far west as you can go, I guess.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Martin, anything else?
I'm fine, thank you, Neil.
Ms. Rogers, anything from you that I should have asked?
No points of clarification, Mr. Chair.
Right. Thank you. I think there might be some follow-up questions in the writer reply. I think we'll just see where things get to with the planning consultant's report. What have you got next, Mr. Cubitt?
Well, it's me now, Phil, and you have a copy of my planning evidence, and you're going to probably get grumpy with me because I didn't prepare a summary. Having said your role, you guys, I get too many of them a lot of the time, and I was conscious of the man to my right paying for me to prepare a summary. So I'm just going to briefly talk to my planning evidence if that's okay. But
no, that's fine. That's fine.
Yeah, I can summarise it in a written form and send it through like that. There's not really a lot of, like, Kirsten's done a very thorough section 42A report. We go back a long way. So there's only 2 areas of contention from my perspective with the planning report, because the first one relates to the status of the activity. Kirsten's applied the standard bundling approach that most people do. But in this case, I don't think it's appropriate, and I've set out in my paragraph 19 some of the case law around that. And effectively, this particular proposal meets the criteria when we don't bundle. And that's because what makes this non-compliant as a whole, if you bundle, is the non-complying building platform on lot 4. Now, lot 4 is the least contentious of all of this, and that was purely on the basis of it being an alluvial land bank and supposedly flood prone. So building on lot 4 has applying person's approach has kicked everything into non-compliant. And the reality is that that building platform has no flow and it's not connected to the building platforms on lot 1 and lot 2. As far as I'm concerned, they are the things you should be focusing on, not lot 4. It's pretty straightforward that because it's designed to address that issue. And you might say, well, why is that important? It is important because non-compliant activities have strict tests to meet, as you'll be aware. I'm comfortable that it meets those tests, but from my perspective, more importantly, it's the fact that discretionary activities, which the subdivision is, the buildings on lots 1 and 2 are restricted discretionary activity, and that's quite an enabling category. So what I'm saying here is that the proposal is contemplated by your district plan, and that's important when you consider not necessarily the permitted baseline, but the anticipated sort of development level that your policies in your plan address and address that landscape issue. It is important to understand how it's done in your plan. And I'll settle that, I won't go through that in detail. And secondly, it's also from a precedent integrity, plan integrity issue, discretionary activities and restricted discretionary activities don't raise that concern. So I'm not comfortable with this being identified completely as a non-complying activity. I'd be happy with it discretionary with lots 1 and 2 in the subdivision and just lot 4 being non-compliant. Lot 4 is really a non-issue. Person might address that in her summary, but my position is that you should probably just apply the categories as they are, or at worst provide a discretionary category for the subdivision and the building platforms on lot 1 and 2, and leave lot 4 as the non-complying aspect of the building platform. So that's all I'm going to say about that. And I mentioned the permitted baseline there, and Kirsten's going to tell you in review that I've mentioned the density provisions, that they're not strictly a permitted baseline, and that's correct. It's what the plan anticipates, and that's what the policies actually address. That's, and I've highlighted in there some of the explanations and reasons why that has been chosen. The minimum site areas have been chosen to deal with the landscape and amenity issues. And while this is in a significant, well, an amenity landscape, there is no provisions that specifically address that in the plan. Really, the policies, apart from the fire control, the policies really address rural amenity as a whole. There's outstanding natural landscapes, but that's something different. And I've highlighted the difference of those in my evidence. And amenity landscapes, really, that's where we differ. They are amenity landscapes. They're a perceptual thing. They don't have the intrinsic values that an outstanding natural landscape may have. So that's where I think Jess and Kirsten have erred in terms of assessing this. They haven't actually considered the fact, well, this is actually an amenity landscape. Doesn't have Section 6 values that requires you to recognise and provide for. This is just have particular regard to. And your duty, when you do that, you have to consider the plan as a whole. And the plan as a whole has an average subdivision density of 8 hectares. We've gone beyond that here. We put into consideration what Jess raised, got our own peer review, and you would have read all that. Now, for all landscape architects in this, illustrates the subjective nature of landscape. They all say something different. So we've sort of gone halfway between. We've had 2 landscape architects that were happy with the 4 lot arrangement. It might still support that, but Sam being and Julia being the people they are, right, okay, we'll drop that back. And the reason they did that is because this isn't speculative. They're not the other allotment would have been gone to would have been sold to another equestrian friend. It's not a rural lifestyle development, even though it's a small scale allotment approach. It is a rural development. So that really didn't impact too greatly on their vision because it's for a specific purpose. And it addressed some of the concerns. I know Jess has concerns around lot 2, but we think they're mitigated and you won't see, you'll struggle to see that a lot. And I refer to Mike's figures in my plan that you guys have probably had a look at. And I've noted some case law there, the Overall Preservation Society, which dealt with an outstanding landscape, and that plan contemplated development lines on a 20 hectare site. Mike was actually involved in even on the wrong side of that actually, but that actually was a very, well, it was on the outside from cycle trail, so this particular dwelling was huge, and it could have been easily seen from the trail, and was easily seen, but the environment board held, well, this site, this dwelling is clearly contemplated on this site. So it's really about how you design this so the perception of that landscape is not materially changed in the viewer's eyes. And if you see that site, then go, well, it's a lot more prominent and significant than what we're dealing with here, and that was achieved in that case. And we're just saying this is the same here. So I don't think it's appropriate for Kirsten to provide a cautionary approach. And in Kirsten's defence there, there was a bit of confusion around Steve, the patch limited landscape assessment, which we provided earlier. We should have made it clear that that should have been a part of the assessment, but it's there now, and that's the halfway house that we've adopted. So what I'm saying in terms of the assessment approach, Mr. Moore's got it right, because he's considered the district plan as a whole, how you should look at it in terms of the amenity landscape planning, and how it's been designed, addresses all the objectives and policies, and what you're seeking to achieve in that landscape. And we know Central Otario's landscape is special. I grew up here. I lived, had a place down the road actually. So none of us want it to be adversely impacted on. Whether it's in a run of, there's no run of the mill rural landscapes in Central Otario. This is elevated to an amenity landscape, then you read the top ones, but all landscapes in Central Otario are important. But this one is currently identified as a amenity landscape, and all the neighbours signed off on it. It was publicly notified. No one in the neighbourhood or from were concerned about it. So I think that tells you a lot in terms of how you should treat this proposal. That's probably all I'm going to say. You'll see I had a little bit of a rant about heritage in there. Submission we got. If you do go on, you'll see this is not going to affect the heritage items at all. If it was going to be an issue, we would have done work on it. It's just not an issue. In my experience, doing that work and applying conditions to a resources to do that work, you're getting up $10,000–$20,000 by the time you do what Heritage New Zealand requires. And no significant gain. I'm not going to address the objectives and policies or the regional policy statement. Just to highlight there that probably slight conflict there because I was on that regional policy statement panel that removed the mandatory requirement for Section 7 landscapes to be included in district plans, and largely on places that are just outlined. They're amenity landscapes. They're actually for the local community to determine. They're not a regional issue. It's up to the community to decide how they may want to deal with those issues. And I envisage Central Otago will continue on with that process because it is a special place. But there are other districts that don't need to go to that level. So basically, just in conclusion, I did make some comments around conditions. If you are of a mind to grant consent to some slight amendments may be needed there. Really, in conclusion, I just say that it would be actually contrary to your district plan not to grant this consent, as opposed to contrary to granting it, given how the district plan is set up. So that's all I'm going to say. If you have any questions, then fire away, and I'll see if I can answer them.
Thank you, Mr. Cubitt. One thing I've learned in this role is that trying to sometimes get two planners to agree on things is as difficult as getting two landscape architects to do the same. So we're not going to have a debate about planning provisions. We'll leave that for our decision making and see what Kirsten has to say when she presents her submission.
Kirsten and I do agree on probably, if you had, if it was a numbers game, probably 90 out of 100.
Yeah.
One of them has to be the key one, but
Yeah.
that is the landscape architect issue. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you. As I say, it's there's always views that are equally valid, and this panel has, as you well know, has the role to try and work out which one it thinks is the right one in this particular case. So we will certainly do that, but appreciate your evidence and the advice that you've given and your thoughts you've given in it, and certainly be able to consider it. But yeah, I've got no questions. Martin? Ian?
Where is the map that shows the alluvial fan?
Oh. It'll be here something. So it was in the Mycredon geotech. We got Mycredon water disability, ability to keep river waste and that. And it's actually may possibly not be in the thing, but it's in the Otago portal natural hazards database. I'm looking at Anne and Kirsten to help me out here. And again, it's quite a broad-based, very broad-scale plan. I was surprised when I saw that, because if you go up there, it's actually quite a small dry creek there, but obviously whatever catchment feeds into it must have some impact lie down. But most of the water's to the left of that, when you go there where the swamp area is. The main gully of yours, obviously watering, but clearly it has been watering.
The bands either side of that.
Yeah, but it's that bottom bit has kind of beans out, but there's another channel.
The bands only to the east of it, bottom of the gardens.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of, it's, but the platform's been built up by advice. I'd say they're 1 in a 200 year, they're lucky. And
was the site of the building platform in Lot 4, was that the only site that was considered?
it's been moved a couple of times to address that. And that's really the only place you could probably put it because of all those constraints and that lower bin because it's very damp wet.
Yeah.
And then you're a dry gully instead of hills. It's really the only place you could go.
Initially, we did have it lower and over there because of the fan, we moved up and out of the way.
Yeah.
It's accepted by the.
So just kind of be pushed closer to where we're over there.
And then the eastern side of that Lot 4 is quite steep.
Yeah, the going and then it goes up the base to the top. Okay. You could probably get away with it down and if you, that constraints plan probably in the A1 area, but again, that's quite damp. It is, that whole area is damp.
On the other side of the road.
Yeah, on the other side of the proposed road, but wouldn't be ideal if think where it is this location. And that's probably not going to be a substantial home, so manager's accommodation and it'll be probably not even rented out, but it'll be if people will be using that house as they.
Yeah, it's like 2-bedroom cottage.
Yeah. But the reason they're in separate lots is one word, banks. Can't move them otherwise.
So Ian, are you happy with that question about the alluvial fans? You've worked out where it is and what the issues are around it?
Yeah, thank you.
I think you can see it on site. Yeah.
Would I be unfair in making the observation that some of the alluvial fans that have been identified are a bit like some of the OUC classifications?
I didn't quite pick that up, Mr. Chair.
Some of the
you
alluvial fans that have been identified are a bit like some of the LUC classifications.
Yeah, they're probably a little bit more accurate. But it is a broad scale thing, but yeah, I don't know. But when you have a look at that gully, so the concern about the heritage, there is some tailings up that gully and they don't look to have been disturbed by water coming down. So anyway.
Yeah.
They are
Okay.
broad scale, but it is what it is, so we've addressed that.
Thank you. Martin, did I ask you already, Martin?
You have, and nothing, thank you.
And anything clarification from you?
No, okay. Just, Mr. Chair, I can share with Ian as Mr. Kevin's pointed out, the Natural Park has a database here, Otago Regional Council, we can show that to you if you'd like.
Sorry, I couldn't quite get it. It does show it, or?
It shows the illegal fan, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Yeah. That's on our e-plan, isn't it?
Not yet, no.
Oh.
No,
I'll stop. I'll stop looking for it then.
Yeah, no, it won't be because it's not ours and we don't maintain it, or that information is regional councils, so it won't be on our database.
Thought it was.
The interesting thing about the natural hazard aspect is ORC did submit on this. Maybe in connection with the LUC 3, but we're interested in the natural hazards. It's not an issue.
Right. Thank you. Okay. Thanks, Mr. Cubitt. Anything else from the applicant's point of view that we want to hear about?
I don't think at this stage, thank you, sir. We'll may have some comments in reply, but no, that's our case for the moment. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you, and thank you for summarising your evidence and pointing us out to the bits that are relevant in terms of us to make sure we have our minds looking at. Thank you. That now goes to our section 42A report writer. So Kirsten, I'm asking you to respond to any matters raised in evidence and make your submission, please.
Thank you. Well, Alan's rather successfully identified all the things I'm going to address.
I expected nothing less.
So if I start with the permitted baseline, I'm just going to maintain that there's no permitted baseline for subdivision. And then when looking at the land use, I agree that the site could potentially be used for a woodlot or shelter belt, planting and farm sheds. However, the permitted baseline provides for effects of inactivity if a rule permits an activity with that effect. And I would suggest that a woodlot or shelter belt has quite different effects to residential activity and associated curtilage. Permitted farm sheds do provide built form, but again, are distinct from residential activity and associated curtilage, although I acknowledge these do provide a limited permitted baseline. And as noted by the applicant, they intend to establish equestrian activity on the site, regardless of any residential activity. So the effects associated with equestrian activity would be in addition to any residential activity, as opposed to forming a baseline against which the effects be measured. In terms of applying an assumed baseline for the 8 hectare subdivision, the Rule 4743 provides the subdivision as a discretionary activity, and as the panel are aware, Section 104B provides for the decision maker to grant or refuse the application and if it can't impose conditions. As such, the panel may approve subdivisions which meet a 2 hectare minimum and 8 hectare average where the effects are deemed to be acceptable. However, it should not be assumed that just because the 2 hectare minimum and the 8 hectare average are met, that the effects are automatically acceptable. But that said, in this instance, the main issue of contention is the land use aspect of this application and the landscape effects of it. In terms of bundling, I note the case law that Alan's referred to, but I do think in this instance the effects of exercising the two consents do overlap. So there's a land use and subdivision, and the purpose of the subdivision, at least in part, is to establish residential activity on each lot. And so, but in terms of the non-complying status for lot 4, I do note that lot 4 and its residential and its building platform are an integral part of the subdivision and they are subject to hazard. However, there is no building at this time on lot 4. So if you go back to the land use activity report 4751, in respect of so that provides for buildings on hazards as a non-complying activity. At this stage, there is no building, it's a residential building platform. The non-complying, the application under that rule was a proactive step agreed. Mr. Cullen and I discussed it and thought that it would provide a smoother process for the future development of the residential building platform on lot 4. But technically this rule is not triggered because there is no building. So there's a residential building platform but no building, if that makes sense. So there is a potential for the building, the assessment of the building on lot 4 against 4751 to be deferred until the time of development, in which case it would take the non-compliant status out of this altogether. There any, do I need to clarify that further?
Yeah. Can you just run that through me again, please? I just want to make sure I've got it clearly in my head. Just run that through again, please.
Okay, so rule 4751 provides for buildings on, land subject to hazard, material damage from hazard, as a non-compliant activity. At this stage, there is just a residential building platform going in place. There is no building. So technically that rule is not triggered. If that, and so therefore you could defer the assessment of 4751 to the time that that development occurs on the residential building platform on lot 4. In which case that would resolve your securities issue. Would mean that they would need to establish at the time that the resident development occurs on the residential building platform that there was, the lot was free from hazard.
So just, I understand that. So what would the process then be to put a building on it? Is that another resource consent application?
Well, they need another resource consent application anyway, because that generally would be a controlled activity. And this would mean the development on lot 4 would then, the non-compliant status would then just defer from this application to the future application.
But if that application for a building is controlled, then it has to be granted. So.
Well, no, because it would still trigger 4751.
Okay. Think about that some more.
I'm sure Kevin might have some additional comments on that.
Yeah, I can't help but think that it makes more sense for certainty all round to address the effects of the building platform as part of this application, which is effectively what we're doing. But yeah, I'm sure Mr. Kiewit may have some thoughts that he will share with us when he has his right to reply.
Okay, so if we turn to the assessment of effects, in terms of the productive capacity of the land, in terms of requiring the report from Mr. Trotter, that is CODC internal processing practice for land which is classified as LUC3. Mr. Trotter's report, in my opinion, has satisfied the requirements of the NPS HPL, and in particular the implementation criteria for 3.8 and 3.9, and establishing the exemptions under 3.10. So instead of in terms of the heritage, so the geotech report submitted with the application did identify the potential for some heritage use of the site. historic heritage. And HNZPT in its submission also identified that there was a water race on the site. The applicant advised in further information that they would offer to exclude the gullies from development as a condition of consent, and then NZHPT said that it may not just be restricted, constrained to the gully area. But despite the applicant's opposition to a condition which required an archaeological assessment, upon review it appears I haven't included one in the draft conditions. And rather I have just included an accidental discovery protocol condition. And so should the panel be of a mind to impose NZHPT's requested condition, then I'm happy to draft up a condition to this effect. Or alternatively, the panel may be satisfied with the accidental discovery protocol condition and the applicant's offer to exclude development in the gully areas. If this is the case, the applicant may wish to provide a map which shows the excluded gully areas. In terms of landscape, the panel has 3 landscape assessments before it, 2 from the applicant and 1 from Ms. McKenzie, who was engaged to undertake a peer review on behalf of council. In terms of the patch review, there was a miscommunication regarding this assessment and it was not considered as part of the Section 42A report, but has subsequently been peer reviewed by Ms. McKenzie. I do note that the 3 landscape assessments reach different findings on the effects of the proposal on open space, landscape and natural character, with Mr. Moore finding the effects to be low, Mr. Skelton finding the effects to be moderate low, and Ms. McKenzie finding the effects to be high. And I agree that I have relied on the most conservative assessment in my report, and I do recognise that the panel may prefer one of the other assessments. In reviewing those assessments, I note that objective 4.3.3 directs the decision maker to maintain and, where practical, enhance rural amenity values created by open space, natural character, landscape and built environment values of the district's rural environment, and to maintain the open natural character of hills and ranges. I'll ask Ms. McKenzie to talk to her peer reviews and Mr. Moore's pre-circulated evidence shortly. In terms of objectives and policies, Mr. Cuban and I are generally in agreement, and I make no changes to my assessment except as follows. Upon reflection, I have softened my assessment of objective 4.3.3 and policy 4.4.2 and in part policy 4.4.10. And we're relying on the evidence of Ms. McKenzie. I consider the proposal to be inconsistent with these other things. In terms of the assessment which finds the proposal to objective 16.4 and policy 16.6, I note that the matters relating to this assessment have been resolved with the amendment to the road, and I now consider the proposal to be consistent with these. In terms of conditions, should the panel be of a mind to grant consent, I support the changes by Alan to 7.8, include accessory residential buildings. And I also support the change to condition 7E to refer to only rural use activities and buildings. And I would just make a query of the applicant to address in the right of reply with respect to the anticipated solar power connection. There is a condition in there 6E which requires power connections to be into the law boundaries, and I just wondered if they wanted to comment on that.
We do both, I guess.
And so I'm happy to take any questions and then pass over to Jess for comment.
Thank you. Sorry, just there was some response, I think, given to your proposed condition about power to the boundaries. Was that did I hear that right, or was that just some other noise?
Yeah, sorry, we're trying to have a quiet conversation yourself, but Stan would put your normal power connections to the boundaries anyway. As you pointed out, it does get a bit misty out their way, so
thank you. Thank you.
In context, got to make some money, I guess.
No, thank you. Right, thanks, Kirsten. Just back to that objective about making it a taken away from being non-complying, and then when the consent is applied for the building, can I just clarify that in that case, will that be then for a controlled activity, and would that otherwise mean that the two different assessment criterias and one gets around it, if you like? Is that how am I anticipating? Am I understanding that correctly or not?
No, so establishing residential activity on a residential building platform is a controlled activity, but that doesn't negate the fact that rule 4751 would be triggered. So that rule would still be triggered. So that would override the controlled activity status. So it would become non-compliant at that time.
Okay,
Essentially,
right. Yep.
it's the same, it's still separating out the residential activity aspect on lot 4 from the rest of the subdivision, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. No, I think I understand where you're going, and I'm sure Mr. Cubitt has heard what you've got to say, and he might tell me something in reply that will be helpful or not. And can you just clarify to me? Well, sorry. In the peer reviews done by council, the peer review done by council, that's Ms. McKenzie's work, and you said her, and she ended up at the high end. The patch one was in the middle, and Mr. Moore was at the lower end. Is that effectively a good summary of how that worked out?
I think Mr. Moore would be low. Mr. Skelton would be to the low side of middle, and then Jess would be, it would be more there.
I don't expect an answer, but I'll make the observation. How can that be? But anyway, I'll leave it at that, because it seems to be not untypical with landscape architects, unfortunately. Makes our job very easy. But anyway, we'll work through that. That one. No, I don't have any other questions, I don't think, at this stage. Martin?
And subject to the conditions, I noticed in one of the signed approvals that there was suggestion of a no further subdivision clause.
That's correct. So that was for the neighbours to the west, I believe. And that was when it was a 4-lot subdivision, and that was the lot that was down that boundary. And so what had happened is that then had merged with what is now lot 1.
Yes.
So therefore there didn't seem to be the need for
that was discounted.
what was being moved.
Thank you.
Ian, any questions?
Yeah, regarding lot 4, is the location of the wastewater disposal field in relation to the waterways, is that considered as part of this process?
Well, it will need to be cited appropriately in terms of it would need to be separated from the pond, I assume. And then there are standards that it will need to meet. So they will largely be addressed at the time of development. It's difficult for them to identify where the disposal field is going to go until you work out how the house is going to be orientated within the building platform.
Thank you. Sorry, you stopped, and I thought there was going to be something more, but that was a stop. Ian, happy with that? Right. I think then the intention was now to hear from Ms. McKenzie, is it?
Yes.
Welcome.
Hello. So is it easiest, there's kind of general areas of agreement regarding the proposed lot 4 platform and the visual effects. Is it easiest for me to run through the disagreement and the rationale for my findings?
I think that would make sense to me. That will be helpful, and hopefully between the two, then we can find out whether there's any somewhere in the middle, or who might be more right than the other person.
So
Or
the
are you,
key
or are you
areas,
both wrong?
it's entirely possible. The key areas of disagreement are the magnitude of adverse effect on landscape character. As has previously been mentioned, Mr. Moore has found that the degree of adverse effects on landscape character is low, whereas I consider it to be high. There's also disagreement about the maintenance enhancement of amenity values relating to both the objectives and policies and section 7 of the RMA, which is kind of related to the character. With regard to landscape character values, the Te Tangi Atamanu, which is the New Zealand Landscape Assessment Guidelines, describes a landscape effect as an outcome for a landscape value. While effects are a consequence of change to the physical environment, it is the outcomes for the landscape values that they are derived from each of its physical, associative, and perceptual dimensions that makes the effect. So to assess effects, we must determine the nature and magnitude of this effect. So in this case, there's no disagreement that the effects are adverse. It's just that I think they're high and Mr. Moore thinks they're low. And we have a 7-point scale that's fairly consistent to describe that. With regard to the adverse effects here, they relate specifically to landscape character, which is different from visual effects. Visual effects is a subset of landscape character. However, a change does not have to be visible for it to have an adverse effect on the landscape. And it's just one method of assessing effects. In fact, in the landscape guidelines, they recognise it as a pitfall to just assess the effects on landscape as those that are visible. And this is reiterated in the patch memo in paragraph 9. So with regard to the values of this landscape, I've quickly run through the values, which I consider to be most relevant here. So it's an open rural pastoral character currently, and that the attributes and values that contribute to this character are the landform pattern, which is the legible terrace, the gully features with steep rises, and the expansive flat on the top of the terrace. The vegetation patterns, which is on the top of the terrace, exotic pasture grasses are dominant with scattered exotic shelter belts, one woodlot spreading onto the top of the terrace. And on the faces, it's exotic pasture grass again with patches of scrub and remnant native vegetation in the gullies. There are also 3 woodlots present on the rises. On the valley floor, the vegetation is more exotic vegetation related to shelter and amenity with areas of vines and exotic pasture. The settlement patterns in this area tend to be that residential development is concentrated on the valley floor outside the terrace, with the terrace faces and tops retaining a more open, undeveloped character. I believe there is a rural living development that has recently been established on the top of this terrace. The openness of the upper terrace with its flat topography and limited build form also contributes to the open character. Shelter belts do create a degree of enclosure in places, but this is limited due to the scale of the terrace and the openness to the east. In contrast, the landform features and vegetation on the side of Burn Cottage Road provide a strong sense of containment within the valley. In terms of the complexity of the landscape, the hill slopes and escarpment faces and valley floor have a relatively high degree of complexity as a consequence of the landform and vegetation patterns. The terrace top, in contrast, has a low degree of complexity due to the flat topography and the relative absence of built form and the uniform vegetation patterns. In terms of coherence, there is a legible terrace landform pattern in combination with the predominantly open pastoral character of the terrace top contributes to its impression of coherence. In contrast, the valley floor is relatively fragmented in terms of vegetation, settlement patterns, and land use, and has a limited coherence. And then naturalness. The upper terrace displays a relatively high perception of naturalness as a consequence of its relatively open and pastoral character, combined with the proximity to the vastly scaled ONL to the north. The valley floor displays a moderate degree of naturalness with rural living development integrated through topography and vegetation. I consider that this proposal will alter the above attributes such that the open and rural values of the landscape will be adversely affected to a high degree. Essentially, it will provide the spread of the concentrated rural living development from the valley floor onto the upper terrace, shifting the landscape character from that of an open rural landscape to a rural living landscape. Again, I note that just because a change is not visible, it doesn't mean it has doesn't have an adverse effect on landscape values. I note that the openness and uniform flat topography of the terrace top makes it highly sensitive to change, and the introduction of mitigation in the form of landform modification or vegetation will exacerbate adverse effects on openness, naturalness, and coherence. So essentially, adverse effects on landscape character relating to the introduction of rural living development in this location will be very difficult to remedy or mitigate, and therefore I believe they should be avoided. There seems to be some, in the planning evidence and the landscape evidence, some notion that amenity values only relate to those that are visible. Again, amenity values can also relate to values that can't be seen, but are still inherent in the landscape as discussed above. And then I've just got some notes here about cumulative effects and precedent, which don't seem to have been covered. However, Mike Moore does suggest that because there is development already on the upper terrace, that provides for additional development to be.
Sorry, can I just pause you for a moment? I've just got to pop and stop a dog from doing something that shouldn't be doing.
Sure.
Everyone back? Everyone is back, Liam.
Thank you very
Wonderful.
much. Thanks, Jess. Sorry about that.
That's okay. Happy for me to continue.
Yes, please.
So a couple of other issues relating to cumulative effects where Mr. Moore suggests that the fact that there's existing development on the terrace top makes it appropriate for further development. I consider that this established development actually makes the top more vulnerable to change, as the addition of 2 additional rural living developments will exacerbate the adverse effects on the open rural character beyond a threshold for rural living, where there will be a permanent shift from a landscape character of open rural landscape to one of rural living landscape. There's also precedent, which is something to be considered. The values that I identified earlier apply to the entire terrace top, and that's essentially what makes it a significant amenity landscape and also makes it sensitive to change. The proposal relies on the following assumptions, which I consider to be incorrect, is that the development being set back from the terrace edge and not visible makes it appropriate, and that the landscape effects relate primarily to visibility. If that's accepted, well, I appreciate every application should be assessed on its individual merits. There's nothing that separates this proposed rural living development that's set back from the terrace edge from any other on this terrace, which would set a precedent for significant rural living development and degradation of the open rural landscape. And that's my rationale. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Just in terms of the dwelling that's already been built, and I'm picking that's the one that's to the northwest of the proposed lot. The number's right. Proposed lot 1. In fact, on page 19 of Mr. Cubitt's evidence, I think I can see it in the top left-hand corner. Is that the particular dwelling that we're talking about?
Yes.
Okay, so what I'm hearing you say, I think, is that saying just because there's one there doesn't make it right for there to be potentially 2 more?
Correct, yeah.
Yeah, and even though it's, dare I say, out of sight, doesn't take away from, in your view, to the effects on the landscape.
Exactly, yeah.
Would it be fair to say also, and this is, I'm not a landscape architect or a landscape person or very visual, but would it be fair to say that the terrace is a different sort of, and this is my words, it may not be technically correct, a different landscape unit than the gully or the lower valley part of it? They're not the same sort of areas. So within the landscape of the subject property, there are a couple or 3 different aspects to it, maybe better than units.
Yes, I'd say that's fair. I'd say the whole area kind of makes up the unit. However, the attributes and the values
Yeah.
of the valley, the terrace rises and the terrace top are very different.
Okay, so and I guess in the case here is that the impact's actually on the amenity value as opposed to landscape value, or both?
It's on the landscape character. So it's
Character.
essentially on the, it's not amenity or the views, it's on the amenity values and the character of that landscape, which is derived from the openness and the lack of development and the ruralness.
So what else apart from residential dwellings could impact on that? Just to try and get the perspective about, what's the right sort of stuff to happen in that for that landscape character and values, and what's the wrong stuff? And I think you're saying residential houses is the wrong stuff. What will be the right stuff?
Well, that's a good question. Obviously, rural development on that terrace top has been what it's been used for, and that seems to have made the character that it is currently. So I would say rural development would be appropriate. The spread of the residential is where the concern arises. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it does. I guess what it does, it leaves me in my mind going, how did that other one get through then, if that's the case?
That is a good question.
And that one that comes up far too often sometimes, and they might be quite appropriate and quite right, but I just have to scratch my head and go, it is a bit confusing. All right, I think you've explained what I thought you might say, so no, thank you for clarifying. And yeah, this is maybe an unfair question, and it's a pretty general one, but and you may say, no, I'm not going to answer it, or answer it a different way, but why is it that no disrespect to any of the landscape architects involved here, but we go from low to high? It just seems such a large range for us as a panel to have to consider, and I suppose is it you're both wrong, or just different ways of looking at it, or what is it in landscaping speak that can lead to these differences? Because it's really doing my head in.
It's doing all our heads in.
Good.
I think that the issue is that because the effects on the landscape relate to the values of that landscape, each landscape architect, for example, in Queenstown, there's been quite a lot of work done on essentially working out a uniform values rate, like what the values are of each landscape. Whereas for a landscape such as this, each landscape architect has to assess the values and work out what they think they are. So in this case, I've identified values relating to the openness, the vegetation pattern, whereas Mr. Moore has identified the key values as being those relating to views. So that's where, in this case, I believe the difference arises.
Okay, so you're both right.
Yes.
and you're both wrong, and ultimately the panel will make a decision ultimately, and it'll be more right than everybody else. Yeah, no.
Sure.
Yeah, no, thank you. I do understand, and that example of the Queenstown one's a good one to have in the back of our mind as well. But yeah, no, I appreciate that clarification. Thank you. I don't have any other questions, and I got a cough. Martin, you.
Jess, when you refer to the rural aspect, and currently it's fairly unmodified, but then you could put a barn on that site, couldn't you?
Yes, you could put a barn on that site.
And that would have a fairly significant visual impact on that environment, wouldn't it?
It would have an impact on that environment. However, it wouldn't change the character from a rural character to a rural living character, which is where my concern arises in this case. There's very different characteristics related to a site that's developed for rural living than a site that's developed for genuine rural activity.
So then could conditions be applied then to limit some of the urbanisation of that area, like clotheslines and curtilage and things like that?
Yes, so those have been proposed by the applicant. I think those were proposed pretty early on in the process, and those definitely do help to contain the kind of domestic elements associated with residential development. However, the issue here relates to kind of the spread of more intensive rural living development as opposed to rural land uses.
So you're relying more sort of on precedent in this case?
I
That-
think sorry.
Yeah, no, that's no, yeah, I'll leave, yeah, that's the question. You're relying on precedent.
I think that precedent is a key issue here, mainly because the factors that the application has relied on to say that this is appropriate apply to essentially the entire terrace. But I do think that this terrace area has a character that is pretty unique in the Central Otago district, in that at this point it hasn't been rural living hasn't encroached on it, which is forms part of its character, and that is, in my opinion, one of the reasons that it's valued. I think that it's fairly widely accepted that rural landscapes without residential development have a higher value in terms of amenity than those with rural living.
Thank you.
Ian, you got anything?
No.
Right. Do you want to take Martin's question a bit further about the farm shed type thing? And have we got a situation in our plan where a shed fits the rural environment, but a residence doesn't, which could happen on a piece of land that could be zoned in this area, that would mean that you'd never be able to put a house on it from an existing situation, existing title. Would that then follow through, or would that make the view different, saying if the person had this bit of land and the way it was put together that they could put farm sheds, but they couldn't put a house on because of the landscape values? Is that a possibility that could come out?
I think it would be a case by case basis. I think that as a general rule on a rural lot, there is usually a place where you could find somewhere that it would be appropriate to put a dwelling. And in this case, there is an appropriate place to put a dwelling, which is lot 4, where the issue arises is the subdivision and the placement of 2 additional rural living developments.
Yeah, then I suppose we can get some planning rules to get around that effectively, or not get around it, but to make it an argument for another day. But you could well be subdividing a piece of land that could never get built on because it couldn't meet the landscape assessment criteria.
Essentially, yeah, that is a possibility.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. I don't have any other questions. Thank you for sort of providing some insight into how landscape architects can get to where they got to, confirming that you're always right, all ears. Yeah, it's an interesting way of looking at things, and some other discussion the council might want to have about how it does look at landscape values in our district, but that's a matter for another day. Thank you. And any clarifications that we've missed?
No, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. All right. So nothing further to add from Kirsten then either as a follow-up to that? All done. So that would mean then, on that basis, we're now back to the applicant for the right of reply. I'll hand over to Mr. Cubitt. You might want to have some time, maybe, Ellen, to set out what you want to say, or you may be able to do it on the fly, or whatever. How do you want to proceed?
No, I'm fine. Thanks, Mr. Chair. We can jump right into it. I wouldn't want you to order, I think we might just deal with the landscape issue first and foremost. Now I'll allow Mike to correct me if I move into incorrect positions, but as I've highlighted in my evidence, what we're dealing with here is an amenity landscape. We're not dealing with the Section 6 landscape, where landscape character probably becomes more important, the intrinsic values of that. And unfortunately, I'm not connected to the internet here, so I can't bring up the definition of amenity in the RMA. And that is very people focused, it's the perception of. So I really, really struggle with landscape architects that tell me if you can't see it, but you know it's there, that's an adverse effect. Now, that might be true in an outstanding natural landscape. We're protecting those for different reasons. This is an amenity landscape. There are no different provisions applying in the plan really, apart from that overlay. So you can take the argument about the open space, you can take that to anywhere in your district. You can take that to anywhere in your district. And I know this district intimately. I grew up here, I'm here all the time. You have big wide open spaces everywhere. If you don't factor into that assessment what your plan provides for in those areas, which is rural activity, which I'll address in a minute, with a certain density level, that's the decision that was made by the council. We can't revisit that here. You may revisit that in your review coming up. But it's that policy framework that sets how we should be assessing amenity. So I have a major problem with Jess's assessment. I understand how landscape architects do it. There's the visual effect and the character effect. But this is an amenity landscape, as I keep harking back to. If you go and read my evidence again, that overall protection society case is quite significant in that sense. So we have 3 landscapes, which includes the original person, and Stevie, who will come to me there, was involved in this. That 2 of them didn't have a problem with four-lot approach. Steve he geared more to Jess's side of things to keep the open space. So we've dropped a lot.
And we're moving to the
Yeah, in the moderate to low assessment that he has in that sense, and R&A speak, and Mike will confirm this, that is minor. So we've actually gone from less than minor with Mike, minor to Steve, we've gone to high, which in R&A spec would be significant. I've highlighted those viewpoints in Mike's evidence that I do not see how, even from a landscape character perspective, how there is a material impact on this particular site from what's proposed here. Jess raised the precedent issue with all. Jess isn't a planner, and precedent is not an environmental effect. So you come to assessing the effects of this, precedent is relevant. That's a policy issue, and that's why I have slight concern with identifying this as a non-compliant activity. And you look at this particular parcel of land in the context of that SAR, and I'm going to deal with precedent in this way, but it sits back to the west. It's not the front of this SAR. So you may well come up with someone may see this, but in reality, I've had these arguments for precedent my whole life and officially liking this. They don't, the floodgates don't open. It's a difficult thing. We could go for months and years. It's a hard process for people generally don't want to go through it, and this is a farming area. But you may get an application in New South Wales that we might do that as well. They will have to satisfy the same tests that we've satisfied that you can't see this thing. Now that takes us into the concern G says with the open space character, but I hark back to your district plan. You've set that standard, and if you can't see it in an amenity landscape, there is no perception available to anyone. All the neighbours have signed off. There's been no submissions in that regard. And there's a continual reference to rural living. Yeah, it's a rural site, but this is a rural activity. And Councillor McPherson raised a very valid point. Sam could go build a big yard there, a big barn, lots of activity going on around that, not controlled the landscape context. Here, this has been very well controlled. And it is a rural activity. The reference was made to genuine rural activity. This is a genuine rural activity. Not sure where else to do equestrian activities. Can't do it in this particular location. So the other points raised about shout-abouts and so forth, well, I look at the plans and the photos that Mike's provided. Yeah, I actually like that open looking landscape. It's a century open landscape. Grew up on that. If you put shout-abouts along there, which you could, that would have it. And this is going back also to the baseline argument. My baseline comparison wasn't around the fact that subdivision needs consent or residential dwellings need consent. No, it's activities that have an effect on the landscape, character, values, openness, all those things that Jason Kirsten talked about. There is a baseline there. It can easily be closed up. You can plant, you've seen photos of shout-abouts, woodlots. Now, I'm not suggesting that Sam would actually do that because they actually like that landscape the way it is, but plan actually, just because this site hasn't been used for intensive activity, rural activity, doesn't mean it can't be in the district plan. Who knows? It could be a place of vineyard. We've seen it further down. We've seen all those terrace fronts being developed. Clearly across the other side, although it's a landscape across the other side of the lake that probably accommodate more things within here. So I just think the wrong assessment's been made of this from one landscape to two, actually, but I didn't actually agree with Steve's Skelton's assessment either in terms of the open character. The open character here has been maintained. It's not been developed at the minimum density or average of 8 hectares, average 10. And it is a rural purpose subdivision. And excuse me while I scan. I can be a doctor because I can't read my handwriting either. Yes,
Just one reason. Figure 14, why, is the same SAL as what you're talking about, right? So here across the area that's been developed for intensive horticulture. And there's a place about going to have a meeting you want something to go on. I think that's a good example to bear in mind when you think about what could happen on this landscape and compare that with what we're talking about, which is trying to protect a lot of what's there now with some housing on it, which I think will have a lot less effect than from that sort of stuff.
But you have to remember, houses are a part of rural management, always have been for rural. And I dispute the fact that people see them as adverse. Houses where people live, friendly families, peace, security, all those things are a positive thing. What we're trying to do here is make sure no one's impacted, the neighbours aren't impacted, the wider environment's not impacted, and Mike's done a good job, as far as I can see, with that, and that's evidenced by the fact there's been no submissions and all the neighbours have signed off. You want to take questions on that bit now before I turn to Kirsten's comments? While it's fresh in our mind.
Just to make sure I did hear correctly then, you just put forward the observation that residential living on rural land is to be expected. Is that effectively what you told me?
Yes.
And using the example that Mr. Moore gave of that view off the Highburn Terrace is an example of that, or is it just the type of other activities that can take place on the rural land within a significant amenity landscape?
I'll let Mr. Moore answer that, but he's highlighting that, I think, from the change factors that can occur.
There about naturalness perhaps, and domestication in the sense, and that's just domestication really is about taming the natural landscape. But that particular image speaks to me about a natural effect of what could happen under the plan, and of course, a house in amongst that would look completely in order, I think.
Yeah, so effectively you're saying that while there's no residential activity in that figure 14, and there's not, you're saying that if where those buildings were or other activities were, there was a house instead, the view would be the view and it wouldn't be that much different and have no other landscape or amenity value effects.
Exactly, yes.
But also, we're not going to be doing anything like this. We're going to be maintaining this as is compared to what could happen if we went down a develop it agriculturally.
The key word there was domestication, which I've touched on in my evidence here. There's this perception that it's a pristine natural environment. Well, it's not. It's clean, it's domesticated. It's a farming environment. And there are things there, and there are things that are allowed to occur there because it's a rural environment. I was saying, so I deal with these amenity landscapes all around the place, and no, you both understand you can't lock everything up to the status quo for one particular value. You have to have a balance there. And that's why we're here, because we're working through that balance.
No, thank you. I understand. Martin, Ian, any questions from the planning perspective before we move on? Or the landscape stuff? No, carry on. Thanks, Mr. Cubitt.
Okay, thank you. Didn't have a lot to respond to in relation to question. I touched on the permitted baseline. I think there, in terms of landscape, effects on the landscape, there is a baseline. She mentioned the assumed baseline in terms of the subdivision. I'm not assuming that that's a baseline. That's what we consider as an anticipated environment. Yes, we understand that's why we're here. There's no guarantee that you would accept the subdivision, even though that's the minimum. And we're not saying that it will be granted in all circumstances. But what generally happens in amenity landscapes is if you meet those standards and you've addressed all the things that the plan requires you to address. I've never been in a situation where these sorts of things have been turned down. If they get turned down, you have an undersized allotment, or you haven't designed things correctly, but it's not the case here. The bundling one, I'll take your point, Mr. Chair, actually. But we're dealing with it now, so pulling that out. I understand what Kirsten's saying there, but I'd probably prefer it to not be bundled as I've suggested, because I don't accept that what happens on lot 4 is related to what happens on lot 1 and lot 2. And how Kirsten explained those rules working, that illustrates that, because as I understand what she said, and correct me if I'm wrong here, because it wasn't quite, I assumed here we're providing, applying for the, not only the landscape or the subdivision, but also the residential activity on the platform might recommend conditions. But if there's a controlled activity process that follows that, sort of like DCC, I'm assuming, that actually solves that problem, I think, because it's the subdivision stage. I think the way Kirsten explained that, I think it probably actually does achieve that, because the buildings, I'm right, you're saying all 3 of those buildings will need a controlled activity consent to address design. So, which is another thing that you get a crack at in terms of landscape effects. You'll see the final design of that building. Because if you go out there now, you'll see the poles on the platform, and it looks, geez, this is massive. Well, it's actually not. That's just where they're going to be. So there's wriggle room there, drop it down, fit it in. And that's what that phase would be. So on that basis, that's another reason for me that so well you shouldn't be bundling them because they use that second step in the process, almost like the 224C sign off in the subdivision. You've got that next phase to deal with that. So I can carry on, but with the approach I've suggested that we just leave that one sitting out there as the outliers, the non-compliant. Because in reality, it isn't an issue because everyone's accepted it. It's fine. But I am concerned about, for the reason we've just been discussing, that this would be treated as non-compliant. Because I know you said your decision will be right, Mr. Chair, but there is another phase. If we don't like your decision, we can go elsewhere. So I just want to make sure we've got it right, regardless of what you decide. I just want to make sure we've got all those things sort of aligned at this point. So I prefer to unbundle, but not necessarily everything. Just leave that one bill that sitting out there, and you can deal with that in your 104D assessment because it ticks all those boxes, and then you're left with discretionary on the rest of them. The heritage items, yes, this one didn't have that condition. That's fine. I argue about that condition because it wasn't legal, and it's not needed. We're happy with an accidental discovery. I think that's as far as you need to go because we're going nowhere near the actual. And when you see the environment where these things have been built, I don't know what heritage would be there. That flat pasture. So the accidental discovery protocols, all it's needed. Happy to exclude the gulliway. Actually, we didn't understand that.
That's fine.
We are because nothing's going to happen through there anyway. So comfortable with that. Standards and policies. I don't really need to touch on that because that's in my evidence, but all I would say around maintaining and enhance policy framework that Kirsten highlighted there, that's what I'm saying is you have to consider that in the round on the whole of your plan, how it deals with that. It's not just this one open landscape character. You have to factor in, what does that zone provide? What are we doing? So, and that's when I come back to, well, the plan anticipates that you can get development down to 2 hectares as long as you have an 8 hectare average. We haven't gone there. And it is human nature that you do tend to go to that 8 if it's not a rural activity. But what we are seeking here is a rural activity. That's why Julia and Sam aren't concerned really about the loss of that allotment of the farm because this is a legitimate rural activity and it's for their purposes. It's not to be sold off to anyone else. We can't guarantee that, of course, but that is, you have to take it on face value of what's proposed in the action. Anything else? Oh, just to confirm, the intention always was to put power to the boundaries, and so that's all fine. And if you were of a mind to grant consent and you had a draft set of conditions, I would be happy to look at that. But Kirsten's done a good job, and those are thorough and accurate because they didn't put in the this of the way. But anything else? I think that's it really. And Kirsten and I aren't that far along. The one issue, and it's how you assess landscape open character, and you have 3-to-1 split there in terms of landscape architects. So thank you. Happy to take some questions on that.
Thank you, Mr. Cubitt. Appreciate that. And yeah, my comment about we'll be right until we're proven wrong
We've all been in that situation. I'm in that situation today.
Yeah. More than we probably care to acknowledge either. Thank you for just clarifying those various points along the way. I think my gut feel says that the landscape issues are probably the bigger potential stumbling block, for want of a better word. In the event that the panel works through its deliberations and gets to the stage saying 3 landscapers with 3 different views, any chance they might be able to come to some sort of agreed outcome? Think that would be a possibility from your perspective? I should have asked Jess that as well, but I'm sure if I hear what you've got to say, that would be helpful for a start.
So you're suggesting an expert conferencing approach?
Well, potentially, if the panel can't get to a landing itself and wants to be super cautious, do you think there's any value from the applicant's point of view in doing that?
I don't think that would be helpful because I think the views are entrenched. I think you've got enough evidence on front of you that you should probably make that decision. That will depend on Mr. Key's problem. If we have our landscape architects are comfortable with it, so I'm not sure how much it would be. We understand the issue around the domestication of curtilage, and that's why it will be that those curtilages have been pushed a certain way, so they don't impact on the landscape. We haven't gone as far as offering a condition in terms of, and it's not really important to sand site because no one's going to see that. It's probably not even that important to lot 2, but if you don't want anything done to the back of that, which I think is the understanding anyway,
Yeah, we're not.
heavy condition that so it stays natural.
That's the intention.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure there's any value in that. I think it's down to you, fine gentlemen, and your decision on the end of the day.
Yeah, appreciate that. Thank you for your frankness. I just thought I might just float it and see where you got and see if there was any chance of that, but I understand your view and respect that. Thank you. No other particular questions from me. I think that you've made the position reasonably clear, and clearly some work as part of the deliberations that we'll have to look at and how we pull things together. Martin, any questions?
Nothing from me.
Ian?
No.
Thank you. And any clarification we should be getting that you think we've missed?
No, I missed it. No, I didn't, Mr. Beasley.
Right. Well, on that basis then, I can advise that the decision of the hearings panel is reserved. The formal decision will be in writing and available within the statutory period of 15 working days. In the event that the release of the decision is delayed, the applicant will be advised of the delay. The hearing is now adjourned. Thank you, Mr. Cubitt and your team and the applicant, Mr. Halsey. Very appreciate the frankness and work in your submissions, and we'll proceed from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank
Chair.
you very much.
Look forward to it.